Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shiur.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi, which is Shabbos Daf Kuf Lamed Zayin. We're at the Mishnah, which is 6 lines from the top. It says the Mishnah Misha Hayu Lo Shnei Tinoikos. So this individual had 2 infants. For instance, he's a moil, professional moil, who has 2 infants sitting in front of him, who were born 1 day apart. So you have Shtei Tinoikos Echad Lomel Achar Shabbos. One requires his meal to be done after Shabbos, so his 8th day falls out tomorrow on Sunday. Ve'echad Lomel b'Shabbos, and the other infant, his meal is meant to take place today on Shabbos. That's the 8th day. So he has these 2 babies. One of them's meal is meant to take place today on Shabbos. The other one meant to take place on Sunday. And due to his haste and his involvement, his pursuit to do the mitzvah of Milah on Shabbos, he confused things, he mixed things up, he forgot. Umol eshel achar Shabbos b'Shabbos. So he mixed them up, and instead of doing the Milah on the Shabbos baby, he did it on the Sunday baby. He was mol eshel achar Shabbos, the Sunday infant, he did that Milah b'Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Chayev, he brings a chatas, because although he was preoccupied with going ahead and doing a proper mitzvah, because one of these was meant to be done on Shabbos, notwithstanding the fact that he had that preoccupation, he was a ta'ah b'dvar mitzvah, he was preoccupied with doing a mitzvah. Nevertheless, he brings a chatas because, actually speaking, he didn't do a mitzvah. We know that the mitzvah is meant to take place on the 8th day. If he does it before the 8th day, there's no mitzvah. So in this case, practically speaking, he did a malacha. He inflicted a wound, an unnecessary wound on Shabbos, and he brings a chatas. Continues the Mishnah. What about echad lamol be'erev Shabbos? So he has 2 infants. One of them, Milah, was meant to take place yesterday, erev Shabbos, and today is already the 9th day. Ve'echad lamol be'Shabbos. The second infant was meant to have his Milah today on Shabbos, and he confused matters. V'shachach, he forgot umol shel erev Shabbos b'Shabbos. He did the Milah instead of the Shabbos baby. He did it on the erev Shabbos infant, in which case it was shalei bezmanoi. It was out of its prescribed time. It was past the 8th day. Nevertheless, he did a mitzvah. The Milah is meant to take place on the 8th day. Prior to the 8th day, there's no mitzvah. But after the 8th day, although he loses out on the mitzvah of doing it bezmanoi, but nevertheless there is a mitzvah taking place. So we have actually 2 elements in this person's favor, 2 factors going for him. Number 1, he was ta'ah b'dvar mitzvah. He was preoccupied in his pursuit to do the proper mitzvah, to do the mitzvah of Milah, which was meant to take place on Shabbos, on the proper infant. Number 2, in actuality, he did a mitzvah. The Milah, even on yesterday's baby, is considered to be a mitzvah. So we have 2 factors working in his favor. That's why we have a machlekes. Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chatas. Eliezer says, notwithstanding the fact that there are 2 favorable elements here, he brings a chatas. Why? Because he did something prohibited. He did a malacha. He did the Milah on yesterday's baby, on the erev Shabbos baby, which is shaloi bezmanoi. So it was inappropriate, and it's a malacha. Rabbi Shua Paiter. Rabbi Shua says this fellow is pater because we have 2 mitigating factors. Number 1, he was preoccupied with doing a proper mitzvah. He was preparing himself to do the Milah, the Shabbos Milah, which is a proper mitzvah. In addition to that, he actually performed a mitzvah. He did mitzvah's Milah on the erev Shabbos baby, despite the fact that it was shalei bezmanoi. So according to Rabbi Shua, there's no chatas. Let's take a look at Rashi here. Beginning from 5 lines from the top of the Amud, Masnisin says Rashi, v'shachach umol eshel achar Shabbos b'Shabbos chayiv. So he confused things and he forgot, and he did the Milah on Sunday's baby today. Says the Mishnah Chayev. Why? The ta'ah b'dvar mitzvah. So although he was confused and he made a mistake when he was being involved in pursuit of a mitzvah, the ta'ah b'dvar mitzvah lo yasa mitzvahu. But in practicality, he didn't do a mitzvah because he did the bris on tomorrow's infant, and he inflicted a wound unnecessarily. Even Rabbi Shua, who later on tells us that he's pater, in this case, even he agrees because there's only one factor in his favor. He was preoccupied, he was ta'ah b'dvar mitzvah, he was preparing himself for doing a proper mitzvah, but in practice, he didn't do a mitzvah because he did the Milah prematurely. So even Rabbi Shua agrees that he brings a chatas. Proceeds the Mishnah. What about in the case of echad lamol b'Shabbos, ve'echad lamol b'erev Shabbos? So he has a Shabbos baby and he has an erev Shabbos baby. V'shachach umol eshel erev Shabbos b'Shabbos. And he mistakenly did the milah on the erev Shabbos infant. He did it on Shabbos. Rabbi Lezer mechayev chatos the milah shaloi bezman ein adech Shabbos, because a milah shaloi bezman out of its prescribed time does not have the ability to push away Shabbos, to override Shabbos. Now the Chiddush Shiur says Rashi va'af agav l'tov b'dvar mitzvah. Although he was tov b'dvar mitzvah, he was preoccupied, he was confused during his pursuit to do a mitzvah. Shoyot torad ba'isa shel Shabbos, he was preoccupied with the milah which was meant to take place on Shabbos. He was preoccupied with that infant. He was preparing himself for that mitzvah. As a result, he confused things and he did the milah on the wrong one. Now that's one factor, on account of the person, the gaver, the person was pursuing a mitzvah. Number two, another element in his favor is va'af b'zeh asa mitzvah. And practically speaking, he actually did a mitzvah on the infant that he did the milah on. Why? Because this baby is suitable for milah. It's just past his time, and it doesn't justify overriding of Shabbos. Nevertheless, despite the fact that we have these two elements working in his favor, number one, he is pursuing a mitzvah. Number two, in actuality, there was an act of mitzvah which took place. Severely, the Rabbi Lezer holds Tov b'dvar mitzvah, va'asa mitzvah, sheyesh b'chiv chatas chayiv. Even though he was toy in a mitzvah and he did a mitzvah, he brings a chatas. Rabbi Shua poiter, because he holds the svir alei Tov b'dvar mitzvah, since he was pursuing a mitzvah and he was confused as a result. And number two, va'asa mitzvah. What did he actually do? He did a mitzvah. So there are two elements in his favor, and therefore he's potter with no chatas. Says the Gemara, Rav Huna masni chayev. Rav Huna had a version of our Mishnah, the way we have it, that in the beginning, the initial case of the Mishnah, in the Reisha, all agree that he's chayev because, as we explained, there's only one element in his favor. He's pursuing a proper mitzvah, but in practice, he didn't do a mitzvah because we are speaking about the milah, which was done on the Sunday baby, which was still premature, prior to its 8th day. So there was no mitzvah being done, and all agree, even if Yeshua agrees in that case, that one mitigating factor is not sufficient to exempt him from a chatas. Rabbi Yehuda masni potter. Rabbi Yehuda actually had a different version in the Reisha, that the Reisha of the Mishnah tells us that all agree that he is potter, and we'll see soon that he actually has a different girsa, a different version of our Mishnah. Explains the Gemara. Rav Huna masni chayev. Rav Huna had a version that in the Reisha of the Mishnah, even though he was pursuing a mitzvah, but since in practice he didn't do a mitzvah, all agree that he's chayev. The Sani is willing to the price. Oh, Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Rabbi Shua. They didn't disagree. There was no machlokes between Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Shua in the case of this fellow who had two infants to do the milah on. Echad amol b'Shabbos. One needed his milah on Shabbos, ve'echad amol achar Shabbos, and the other one's bris was meant to take place after Shabbos. So he has his Shabbos baby and his Sunday baby. V'shachach, and he forgot umol eshel achar Shabbos b'Shabbos, and he took a hold of that Sunday infant and he did the milah on Shabbos. So despite the fact that he was pursuing a mitzvah because he was preoccupied in doing the proper milah on the proper infant, but since in practice he didn't do a mitzvah because the milah here took place a day early, shu chayev. All agree in this case, a chatas is in place. On which case is there a disagreement between Rabbi Lezer, who obligates a chatas, and Rabbi Shua exempts? We're speaking about a fellow who has two infants. One of them's milah is meant to take place yesterday. The second one's milah meant to take place today. And he forgot, he got confused. Erev Shabbos b'Shabbos, and he did the milah on yesterday's baby. He did it on Shabbos. So in this case, we have two elements in his favor. Number one, he's preparing himself, he's preoccupied in pursuing a proper mitzvah. He was going to do he intended on doing the milah on the Shabbos child. That's number one, on account of the person. Number two, on account of the actual maaseh. The actual act was an act of mitzvah because he ended up doing the milah on yesterday's child. So in this case, we have two elements. We have a machlokes. Rabbi Lezer mechayev chatas. Despite these two elements, Rabbi Lezer says he brings a chatas. since it was inappropriate. It was shalei bezmanai and does not justify chilul Shabbos, so he did a malacha on Shabbos. Rabbi Shua pater. Rabbi Shua says he's pater. Why? Because he was preoccupied with a mitzvah. He actually did a mitzvah that does not require chatas. Explains the Gemara. Ushneim lo ylamdua. Both of them, Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Shua, did not derive their halacha, meaning they based their respective opinions elam avodas kechavim. So they sourced it from avodas kechavim. Rashi says that all the chatois, all the liabilities of chatas, are connected to avodah zarah. We learn from there how to. We have the guidelines, the criterion from avodas kechavim. Rabbi Lezer savar kavodas kechavim. The chiyuv chatos is meant to be similar to the chiyuv chatos as a result of idol worship. Ma avodas kechavim, just like avodas kechavim. Amar Achman Leisav. The pasuk says, Hashem says, don't do it. It's an avera. The chiyavet mechayev. And should one do the avodah zarah, he is chayev achatos achinami here as well. There's no difference, because actually he wasn't meant to do what he did. He did milah, sure, but it was shalei bezmana. It did not justify malacha on Shabbos, so he brings a chatas. Rabbi Shua, he disagrees. He says you can't compare to avodas kechavim. Just the opposite. Hasam over there, the law of mitzvah. There, by idol worship, he did not veer. It's not a mitzvah. That's why he brings a chatas. Hacha mitzvah. In this case, he did the milah, which is a mitzvah, although it was the wrong time. Nevertheless, the actual maisa is a maisa mitzvah. You don't bring a chatas in this case. He was preoccupied with doing a mitzvah. He did a mitzvah. So there is no chatas. So this is the first approach, Rav Huna's approach, that in the Reisha of the Mishnah, we only have one factor in his favor. He wanted to do a mitzvah. He prepared himself to do the proper bris. But in practice, he didn't do a mitzvah. All agree, he's chayav chatas. In the latter part of the Mishnah, the Seifa, we're discussing a case where not only did he intend on doing a mitzvah, but in actuality, he carried out a mitzvah. He did a bris for that child who needed his bris yesterday. So it was the ninth day. But he did a mitzvah. Therefore, Rabbi Shua says, that doesn't require a chatas. Rabbi Yehuda masni pater. Rabbi Yehuda learned a different version of the Mishnah, that the beginning, the initiation of the Mishnah, the first case, is pater, is exempt from chatas, according to all shittas. So he's going to have a different version. The Sani is willing to Nebraisa. Omer Rav Meir. Lo yinechelku Rabbi Lezer B'Shua. So Rabbi Lezer and Shua do not disagree. They both concur in the following case. Al mi shahayu loy beis tinoikos. So the Smoil had the two infants. Echad amo be'erev Shabbos. One needed his milah yesterday, erev Shabbos. Echad amo b'Shabbos. One of them was slated to have his milah today on Shabbos. And what happened? V'shachach. He forgot umal eshel erev Shabbos b'Shabbos. He did the milah on the yesterday's baby, on the erev Shabbos baby. He did it on Shabbos. So we have two mitigating factors, because number one, he was preoccupied with doing a mitzvah, a proper mitzvah. He intended on doing the Shabbos bris today, and in practice, although he confused things, he actually did a mitzvah, because he did the bris on yesterday's child who was already mechuyev a bris, so he did a mitzvah. In this case, all agree, shehu pater, because we have both factors in his favor. So according to this approach, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who's following Rabbi Meir's approach, the beginning, the Reisha of the Mishnah was actually describing this case. So you had a different version in the Mishnah. It was describing a case where his confusion led him to actually do a mitzvah. And therefore, all agree that he's pater. Al ma nechelku. Then on which case is there a machlokes between Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Shua? On the following case. Al mi shahayu beis tinoikos. On a person who had two newborns, echad lamo be'echar Shabbos. One was slated to have his milah tomorrow on Sunday. Ve'echad lamo b'Shabbos. The second one was slated to have his milah today on Shabbos. V'shachach. He mixed things up. Umal eshel achar Shabbos b'Shabbos. He did the milah on the Sunday infant. He did it on Shabbos. In this case, although he had good intentions, he was tabid dvar mitzvah. But what was the end result? No mitzvah was performed, because this bris on the Sunday child is worthless. There's no mitzvah involved. It's still premature. So we only have one factor in favor. In this case, indeed, we have machlokes. Rabbi Lezer mechayev chatas. He says you're chayev chatas because we look at the masa, the actual act that took place. Since there was no mitzvah here, he did something wrong, despite the fact that he had good intentions. But in actuality, he did an avera, he did a malach. He brings a chatas. Rabbi Shua pater. Rabbi Shua says he's pater. Although in practice he didn't do a mitzvah, but we follow the mind, the heart. His intention was to do a mitzvah. Therefore, there's no chatas. They both sourced their shittis from avodas kechavim. Rabbi Lezer Savar, avodas kechavim, were meant to equate the general chatos obligation to the obligation of chatos avodas kechavim. Ma avodas kechavim, just as we find by idol worship, Amar Achman Oli Sava, don't do it. So the Torah warns one to refrain from avodas kechavim. V'chi aved machayv, if he carries out the avera, he is chayiv achatas. Hachinami lishna. In this case as well, there's no difference because he did something inappropriate, despite the fact that he had good intentions and he's preoccupied with doing a mitzvah, because one of these milah was meant to take place on Shabbos. It was the milah bismana. Nevertheless, in practice, he didn't do a mitzvah, and therefore he is chayiv achatas. Rabbi Shua responds. He says, "No, hasam lo Torah mitzvah." In the case of avodas kechavim, he wasn't preoccupied. He wasn't confused with a mitzvah. He was doing avodas zarah, so it brings a chatas. Hacha, however, in our case, Torah mitzvah, he was preoccupied with doing a mitzvah. So it's a whole different context, and there's no chiyuv of chatas. Let's just stop for a moment, take a look at Rashi here. Right off to the right side, just about 1 or 2 lines up. See the Rashi? Hachagar Rabbi Shua Hasam loy Torah b'mitzvah, Torah b'mitzvah. Explains Rashi. In our case, he's Torah b'mitzvah, Torah l'sasik b'mitzvah gemura. He's preoccupied in his preparation, his pursuit of doing a proper, complete mitzvah. Sharei echad mehem zmani hayoim, because the appropriate time of one of these 2 infants is actually today on Shabbos. V'torad liboy, his heart is preoccupied l'mayir v'lases, to hurry up and to do. And due to his haste, he got confused. Umal as zeh she'ein by mitzvah klal. And indeed, he did the milah on the wrong child, on the one where there was no mitzvah involved whatsoever, on the Sunday child. But nevertheless, it was due to his haste, his preoccupation with a proper mitzvah. So it's this similar to avodas kechavim, therefore there's no chiv. Continues the Gemara. So just a quick summary. So according to this approach, when we have, which is Rabbi Yehuda's approach, when we have 2 factors in favor, he was doing something proper, he was pursuing a proper mitzvah, and he actually does a mitzvah, although it's out of time and place, it's shalei b'zmanai, all agree he's pater. When there's only one factor in favor, his intent, his machshava, his kavana was pure, was justified, he was preparing to do a mitzvah. In that case, we have machlekes. Rabbi Shua says pater, Rabbi Lezer says chayiv. Continues the Gemara. Tani Rab Chia, Oymar Hoyer Rab Meir. So Rab Chia learned that Rab Meir used to say the following thing: Loi nechlaku, Rab Lezer, Rabbi Shua. There's no machlekes between them. Al misha hoyer loi beis hinaikas. On a person who had 2 infants, Echad Lamo B'Erev Shabbos. One of them's Mila was meant to take place Friday, Ve'echad Lamo B'Shabbos. The other one's Mila was meant to take place today on Shabbos, V'shachach, and he forgot Umol. Es shel Erev Shabbos B'Shabbos. He did the Mila on the Friday baby, he did it today on Shabbos. Shu Chayiv, all agree that he's Chayiv. Now, at this point, the statement seems to be perplexing. The Gemara soon will explain, because if we have 2 factors in favor, why do all agree that he's Chayiv? The Gemara soon will explain exactly what he meant. So this is the initial statement here. Al ma nechlaku. Where then is there a machlekes between Rabbi Lezer and Rishua? Al misha hoyloi beis hinaikas. In a case where this male has 2 infants, Echad Lamo Achar Shabbos, one's Mila was meant to take place tomorrow, on Sunday, Ve'echad Lamo B'Shabbos, the second one was meant to have his Mila on Shabbos, V'shachach, and he confused matters, Umol Eshel Achar Shabbos B'Shabbos, and he did the Mila on the Sunday baby, he did it prematurely, he did it on Shabbos. So in this case, his intent was pure, he was preoccupied, he was Tov B'Dvar Mitzvah, he wanted to do the proper Mila, but in practice, he actually did not do a mitzvah at all, because he did the milah 1 day too early. In this case, that we have one favorable factor, Rabbi Lezer Mechayev Chatos, Rabbi Lezer says there's a Chayev Chatos, Rabbi Shua Pater, Rabbi Shua says Pater. Why? Because since he was Tor B'Dvar Mitzvah, as the Gemara said before, he's Torrid, so it's due to his haste to go fulfill the mitzvah properly. He did this malacha, there is no chiyuv of chatas. Okay, says the Gemara, but one second, let's just go back to the opening statement of this brisa. How does it work? Hashta Rabbi Shua. Now that you say Rabbi Shua in the Seifa, the loika avid mitzvah, poiter, if you tell me that Rabbi Shua in the latter case, in the Seifa, where he did the Sunday bris on Shabbos, in practice he didn't even do a mitzvah. Rabbi Shua says he's potter due to the fact that he was taught with our mitzvah, he was preoccupied with a mitzvah. So, of course, Reisha, in the first case of the brisa, the kavod mitzvah, he certainly did a mitzvah because he did the Friday baby on Shabbos, which was already past the time. So mitzvah was performed. Mechayiv, can you suggest that all agree, even if Reisha agrees that it's chayiv? How does that make sense? Amrit v'Rabbi Yanai. So they explained as follows. Reisha, the opening statement of this brisa is speaking about kigoyin, for instance, shekadam umol shel Shabbos be'erev Shabbos. So originally the Moil had two jobs. He had a bris on Friday, he had a bris on Shabbos. Now what happened was that he really confused matters in a serious way. He did the Shabbos baby, he did it a day early. Kadam umol shel Shabbos be'erev Shabbos. So he did it on Friday. Now when he entered Shabbos, he still had one baby left, but this infant was a Friday baby. Now this is very different than the other cases we had up until now because he wasn't really pursuing a proper mitzvah any longer. The Shabbos baby was already circumcised, already taken care of. There was no milah to be performed on Shabbos. So he's not really being taught b'dvar mitzvah. He's not preoccupied. He's not pursuing a mitzvah. That's why, in this case, when he proceeded to do the milah on the Friday baby, he did it on Shabbos. All agree that it's chayav chatas. Explains the Gemara, the lo nitna Shabbos l'doches, because this Shabbos was not given to be overridden because he has nothing available today. He has nothing that needs a milah today. However, Seifa, in the next case where he comes into Shabbos with two children that need a milah, one is a Shabbos baby, one is a Sunday baby. Nitna Shabbos l'doches. In that case, the Shabbos itself is given to be overridden, meaning there is one baby that needs to have his bris today. So since he's pursuing that mitzvah, he's preparing himself for that proper mitzvah, it's called Tov B'Dvar Mitzvah and called Yeshua Potter. Says in 1 second, Amalei Rav Ashi Rav Kahana. Reisha Nami, in the first case as well, when he did the milah of the Shabbos baby on Friday, and he enters into Shabbos with one infant remaining, which was the Erev Shabbos infant, Reisha Nami Nitna Shabbos L'Doches. Shabbos was given to be overridden, L'Gabi Tinoikis De Alma, with regard to all other infants in the world. Meaning, doing mitzvah milah on Shabbos is a proper mitzvah when it's the prescribed time. So why do you say that he comes into Shabbos with this Shabbos not having the ability to have been overridden? It is. Shabbos is something which is overridden by other tinoikos that require their bris to be done today. So since he is actually pursuing mitzvah milah, which generally, if it's done at the right time, bizmanai, it overrides Shabbos, so why do you not reckon with that intention? Says the Gemara, it was a big difference. Lahai gavra mia, to this individual mia, nevertheless, lo yisyayev. This Shabbos was not given to have been overridden, meaning this moil had no child who needed milah today. Therefore, we don't regard this individual as a Torah b'dvar mitzvah, as being preoccupied and confused on account of a mitzvah, because he's not preparing himself to do a mitzvah. There is no baby awaiting a milah bizmana on Shabbos, and therefore all agree that he will have to bring a chatas. So in summary, we learned about a milah which was done shaloi bizmana, was wrongfully done on Shabbos itself. What is the halacha? The Gemara just concluded, when there is nothing working in his favor because he's not being torad b'mitzvah, he has no child who is awaiting a bris on Shabbos, all agree that he brings a chatas. We have another two types of cases. We have a case where there's one factor working in his favor. He is torad b'mitzvah. He's pursuing a mitzvah of milah on Shabbos, but in practice he didn't do a mitzvah because he did the Sunday baby on Shabbos. We have another case where we have two factors in his favor. Number one, he's pursuing a mitzvah, he's torad b'mitzvah. And he actually did a mitzvah because he did the milah on, for instance, the Friday child. He did it on Shabbos, so he actually did a mitzvah. So we have two approaches in the Gemara. We have Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda. Rav Huna is the more stringent approach. He says, in the case of a torad b'mitzvah, v'lo yasa mitzvah, where there's only one factor in his favor, all agree that it's chayiv. In the next case, where there are two favorable factors, that's where we have the machlokes. Rabbi Lezer says he brings a chatas. Rabbi Shua says he's potter, since he was tarred mitzvah and he actually did a mitzvah. Rabbi Yehuda says, in the case where there is even just one factor working in his favor, he was tarred with mitzvah, even though he didn't actually do a mitzvah. Rabbi Lezer says chayiv. Rabbi Shua says potter, because it's not like Avodas Kechavim here. He's pursuing a mitzvah. It's in his haste to do that mitzvah that he did the malach, and therefore he's potter. Rabbi Yehuda says, in a case where we have two factors in his favor, number one, the person is involved in a mitzvah. Number two, the actual act was an act of mitzvah. All agree that he's potter from a chatas. Continues the Mishnah. We know that the zman of a milah ideally is on the 8th day. Says the Mishnah, Katan nimoy l'shmoina. So an infant has his milah on the 8th day, but sometimes it can actually take place on other days. The shmoina l'tisha on his 9th day, u'la'asara on his 10th day, u'la'chadasar u'l'yud beis. There's this wide gamut, this wide range. It can range either from his 8th day up to the 12th day. Lo pachas v'lo yoser, no less than 8, nor more than 12. Ha'ketzad. How does this work out? Kedarka l'shmoina. Your typical case is the milah on the 8th day. But if he was born in between one day and the next, so he's born ben hashmashes during the twilight zone, for instance, between Sunday and Monday, and when unsure about the precise moment of his birth, we don't know if it's considered Sunday or Monday. In this case, we have to wait an extra day. Nimei l'tes, he will have his bris milah on the 9th day. Since we're unsure whether he was born on Sunday or Monday, we need to wait 8 days from Monday. So his bris takes place on the following Monday, which is actually the 9th, if you count from Sunday. The reason is simple, because the bris milah prior to the 8th day is not a mitzvah, but after the 8th day it is. So better push it off than advance it. So that's the case of number 9. What about milah on the 10th day? Says the Mishnah, Beis Hashmasher shel erev Shabbos. If he was born during the Ben Hashmasher of erev Shabbos, meaning Friday evening, in which case we're not sure whether his 8th day is the following Friday or the following Shabbos. We can't do the milah on Shabbos, which would be the 9th day, since it's a suffix. We're uncertain as to the precise chiyuv here. We don't know whether his day is Friday or Shabbos, so we need to wait another day and do the bris milah on the Sunday following, which is the 10th, counting for the original Friday. Now what about if Sunday happens to be Yom Tov? So the milah shalei bizmana does not override Yom Tov. Yom Tov la'achar Shabbos, then nimah la'chadasa, we need to wait another day. Beis yomim shel Rosh Hashanah. What if we have 2 days Rosh Hashanah on the time of the Mishnah, which it can fall out on a Sunday? So we have Sunday and Monday Rosh Hashanah. So we can't take a chance. We can't do the milah on Rosh Hashanah. Perhaps it's not the appropriate day. Therefore, he needs to wait another day. Nimah l'shnei masar, his milah will take place on the 12th day. Concludes the Mishnah, Katan achayla. We have an ill child, a umayl and oisai, ad sheyavri. We do not perform the bris milah until he's fully recovered. Amar Shmuel, chatzasei chama. Chama is an illness, a sickness. Chama usually means like a fever. So his fever left him. We don't do the milah right away. Noisim loy kol zayin lavroisa. We give him another full 7 days so that he fully recovers. So they ask the following question. When he says zayin, 7 days, does he mean mi ba'inen me'es leis? Do we need 7 full 24-hour periods? Or do we mean 7 halachic days? So suppose he recovered Sunday right before nightfall. We can do the milah on the following Sunday morning. We don't need a full 7 days, 7 24-hour periods. Is that the case? Or do we actually need 7 times me'es leis? Tashma de Tani Luda. Luda was a Shem Chacham, Rashi says. So he taught like this. Yoyim hibra'isai ki yoyim hivoldai. The day that he recovers from his illness is equated to his birthday. And we're meant to wait 7 days, just like the milah only takes place on the 8th day after birth. Likewise, when he's sick and he recovers, he needs to wait for his 8th day. My love, does he not mean to say ma yoyim hivoldai? Just as the birthday loy b'inem me'es leis, we don't need 7 full periods of 24 hours, right? We do the bris milah on the 8th day, even if it doesn't total 7 times 24. Af yoim hivra'isai. Likewise, the day of his recovery, loy ba'ina me'es leis, we don't require me'es leis. Says the Gemara, loy. No, adif Yoim Yibroisem Yom Yivolde. The day of his recovery is actually superior, requires more, is more stringent than his birthday. When we're speaking about birthday, we don't need to count a full 7 times 24. However, when it comes to recovery, we need 7 times 24 hours, and only after that can we do the bris milah. Ritva points out, what is the comparison to Yom Yivolde? He says that a kid who was sick and he recovered, it is regarded like he was born anew. So you need to wait a full 7 days and do the milah afterwards. Regarding Meis Leis, the Gemara seems to leave it unresolved. Continues the Mishnah. So we learned earlier there's something called tzitzin. There are those flaps of skin of the remnants of the arla. So the arla is the foreskin which he chops off, and he left over some of these tzitzin there, which are ma'akmenas hamila, which impede the milah. They disqualify the milah. How much tzitzin, how large, how significant do they need to be to withhold the kashas of the milah? Basar ha'chayfes rev atara. So if he has the basar, the skin of the arla, which conceals most of the atorah. Atorah is a ridge of skin, an elevated ridge surrounding the aver of the zachar, at the tip of the aver. So if the tzitzin, those remnants of the arla, are large enough to conceal most of the atorah, then it is not a valid milah. He needs to go back, make sure to trim that off. So a child who is considered an arl cannot partake in truma. Let's say this child was a Baal Basar, so he was a bit chubby, and he actually is missing his arla, so they took the arla off, they cut it off, but on account of his chubbiness, his skin, his flesh sags and covers over the aver, and it appears as though the arla was not properly removed. So although minat Torah, the milah is valid, nevertheless midrabanan, the Mishnah says metakna, he's meant to go and fix it on account of appearance. It appears as though he has no bris, so one is meant to go fix it up and reveal the aver so that it looks that it's visible that he has a bris milah. Concludes the Mishnah, Mavale para. What if they did a milah but he didn't do priya? Priya means actually revealing the aver, so he left some skin that covers that atorah area, either the foreskin itself or the membrane beneath it, because the arla has really a double layer of skin. So whatever it is, it's covering over the atorah, and he's not properly exposed there. Ki'ilu loy mal. It's as though he did not do a milah. He's considered to be an arla. Amar Rav Avinu, Amar V'yim Rav Abba, Amar Rav. When the Mishnah tells us that the tzitzin, those flaps which cover roiv ha'atorah, what does it mean? Does he mean most of the circumference of the atorah? Or does he mean even in one spot, if it's concealing most of the height of the atorah? So he said in the name of Rav, Basar HaChayfes Roiv Goiver Shel HaTorah. You don't need to have most of the circumference. As long as it's even in one spot, but it's concealing most of the height of the atorah, that is a problem. So this infant who is covered up, he's surrounded with flesh, so he has plumpy flesh, and he appears to be covered over. It doesn't appear like he has a milah. Royin oisai. So how do we examine him? We take a look at him. Royin oisai. When he is in a situation of kishu, his aver is hardened, erect, and at that point, if he appears like he was mal, because at that point the flesh stretches and he exposes the milah area, in that case there's no concern. There's no concern, you don't have to go and repair anything. But if at that point he's still covered up, tzorach lamol, you need to go back and trim it so that he appears to have a milah. This is Shmuel's version. In a Brayse we learned, so this child, we take a look when we examine. At the point of his aver getting hard, at that point, if we see that he doesn't appear to have a bris milah, you need to go ahead and adjust things. But at the point of kishoy, we don't have that problem. There's no concern. You don't need to go and repair it. So we have two halachas which seem to be saying the same thing, but they're using different words. My binai, is there any halachic ramification, any difference between Shmuel's version and the Bryce's version? This is more actually a very slight nafkamina. Ike binayu, nira ve'ene nira. So let's say the child, at the point of kishu when his aver hardens, it's nira ve'ene nira. It appears somewhat like he was circumcised, but it's not so visible. It's somewhat exposed, ear is somewhat exposed, but not completely exposed. Or perhaps it means that sometimes it is exposed, sometimes it's not. So it's somewhere in between. So that depends on these two versions. Shmuel, who told us, who used the words which were Kol Mashim Iskashavin Niremol. During the Kishui, he appears, he's seen as a mole, so it's visible, it's obvious, it's evident. In that case, there's no concern. According to Shmuel, it needs to be Niremol. If it's Nira, it's a yes or no, there's still concern, he has to go and adjust it. Whereas according to the Brisa, which used slightly different wording, Brisa says, if at the point of Kisha he's Einoi Nira Mol, he does not appear like a mole, then there's a problem. But as long as it's somewhat visible, it's Nira Ve'en Nira, that is okay and that is sufficient. Movele Para Tana Rabbana. We learned in the Brisa. Brisa will give us different halachas of a brachas, of bris milah. We actually have three categories. We have the ordinary Jewish child, we have the milah of a ger, and the milah of an eved. This is the non-Jewish slave which he purchased. We learned that earlier, a milah is required, and they all have three different types of brachas. Says the Brisa, Hamal, so the moel who's proceeding to do the milah, prior to doing the maisi, he says, Omer asher kedeshanu b'mitzvos v'tzvanu al hamilah. Avi Ben, the father of the son, Omer asher kedeshanu b'mitzvos v'tzvanu la'achnisai, to bring him in, b'risai shel Avraham Avinu. Ha'oimdim sham, the public, the spectators that are standing there, they say something. They say a bracha, Kishem shenichnas l'brit tefillah. Just as the child was brought into bris, kach yikanes. Likewise, he should be zoicha to go into Torah lechuppah ulamasim tovim. So that's their tefillah that they say in honor of the child. Now, once a beautiful pshat. Why this order? It seems to be a bit difficult. You say first he went into bris. Likewise, he should go to Torah, to chuppah. Okay, that makes sense. So first you learn, you prepare yourself for life, then you get married. Ulamasim tovim. Masim tovim, good deeds. Why does that come last? So also a very nice pshat that the Torah is required to set a person straight, to figure himself out, to get his track, his life on track. Then that enables him to go chuppah, to get married, and to establish his family, establish his life. A person's really tested only after he gets married. A person's midos, his character, his convictions are really put to test only at that point, living with a wife, with a family, in the household. That's the real playing field for a person's masim tovim. That's when it's really discernible where he's holding. So first, Torah chuppah, and he should be zoicha afterwards to really truly bring out his potential and exhibit masim tovim amongst the close ones to him, amongst his family. That's the tefillah that they say. So that's the mal, the father, and the oimdim. We have one more thing, the mevarich. So they give the honor to a person to make a bracha, and he makes another bracha. V'amavarich oimer asher kidesh yedid mi beten. Hashem who sanctified, who was mekadesh yedid. Rashi says yedid is referring to Yitzchak, who was beloved. The pasuk refers to him as asher ahavta. So Hashem was mekadesh the yedid Yitzchak Avinu mi beten. When he was still in his mother's womb, Hashem instructed Avraham Avinu even prior to Yitzchak's birth that he should go ahead and do the bris milah to Yitzchak. So he was mekadesh him for the bris milah. Even mi beten prior to birth, chayk b'she'er Yisam, Hashem established the chayk, the decree of bris milah b'she'er into his flesh. V'tze'etzav, and likewise his descendants, chasam, he sealed b'ois bris kodesh, with the sign of bris kodesh, al kain, on account of this, b'scharzois, as a reward for this. Keilachai, chalkeinu, our portion, tzureinu, our rock. Tzave, instruct, lahatzil, to save, yedidus she'ereinu mishachas. Yedidus she'ereinu is our beloved flesh, meaning this newborn, save him mishachas from destruction. Rashi says it's referring to being saved from Gehenna. L'ma'an brisai, on account of the bris, his bris asher sam sereinu, that he has established into our flesh. The Mashal points out that the bris implanted in one's flesh is meant to act as an antidote for our desires, and indeed to help us and save us from destruction from Gehenna. And he concludes, Baruch atah Hashem koires habris, the one who establishes the bris. Hamalas hagerim, one does a bris on a ger, Oimer, he makes the following bracha: Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav tzivanu ala milah. V'hamavarich, and the individual that makes the additional bracha, Oimer, he says asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav tzivanu lomo l'sagerim ulahatif mehem dam bris. So he gave us the mitzvah to do milah and to draw from them the dam bris. Shil mole dam bris, because if not for dam bris, loy niskaimu shemaim v'aretz, heaven and earth would not endure. Shenemar im loy brisi yom v'layla, if not for my bris, which is day and night. And why is this considered to be a day and night bris? Because the bris is present on one's body all throughout, day and night, 24 hours. It's a constant bris. So if not for this, chukay shemaim v'aretz, the chukais, the ways, the nature of Shemayim V'aretz, lo yisamti, I would not have placed, meaning that the world only exists and endures on account of this mitzvah, Baruch atah Hashem, koireis habris, Hashem establishes the bris. The Maharal points out that, what's the connection between bris and heaven and earth? He says that the world was created to serve man. Only a complete human being, a complete person deserves that. So the bris which completes the yid, that indeed brings about, causes the continued existence and endurance of the world. Hamolas avodim, one does a bris on a slave, a non-Jewish slave which he purchased, was born in his possession. So he makes a bris milah and he says, Oimer asher kitshanu mitzvah tzivanu ala milah v'mevorech. And the individual who makes the additional bracha, he says, Oimer asher kitshanu mitzvah tzivanu lomos avodim ulahativ mehem bris, to draw from them dam bris, shel mole dam bris, because if not for dam bris, chukay shemaim v'aretz lo niskaimu, they would not endure, they would not exist. Shenemar im loy brisi yom v'layla, if not for the bris, chukay shemaim v'aretz lo yisamti, baruch atah Hashem koireis habris. The Ramban points out why, by the ger, and perhaps the same thing applies to the evet, we discuss the hatavas dam bris, specifically more than something we don't do by the ordinary Yisrael. He says because sometimes the ger comes into the and converts when he already has the bris, as we learned earlier. Sometimes they would do a bris when they were still Gentiles. So the hatavas dam bris in that case was a requirement, as we learned earlier. So that's why we make reference to hatavas dam bris in the bracha of the ger and the evet. Hadran aloch Reb Lezer de Milah. So in summary, we learned about the brachas of milah. By ordinary Yisrael, we make the bracha of al hamila. So the moil makes the bracha asher kitshanu mitzvah tzivanu al hamila. He does that by the Yisrael, by the Gerim, by the Avadim as well. By the Yisrael, we have that unique bracha where the father says la'achnisa b'ris shavam avinu. The individual who makes that additional bracha says asher kiddush he did mi beten. By the Gerim, the additional mevarach says lo mol sagerim latavim dam bris, and by the Avadim he says lo mol savadim, and makes again reference to the dam bris. Continues the Mishnah. Rebbe Lezer Omer, Toilin is a shameres b'yamtiv. Shameres is a strainer. So it's some sort of cloth, a porous cloth, where they used to spread it over a kli to use it as a strainer, and they used to pour through it. We're speaking about wine, so that it filters the shmarim, the residue of the wine. So Rebbe Lezer maintains he can actually position it, put it in place on Yom Tov, despite the fact that it seems like he's making some sort of oil, like a tent, because he's covering over the gap of the kli. Nevertheless, Rebbe Lezer maintains he could do it on Yom Tov, as the Gemara will explain. Now on Shabbos he can't actually position it there, but he can be nice and little. You can pour the wine into the strainer which was already hung onto the kli. You can do that on Shabbos. And the according to Rebbe Lezer, there's no concern of boirer here, although he's separating good from bad, because as the Rashba points out, since he's simply pouring it through, he's not actually sifting it and manually manipulating the sifter. Rebbe Lezer maintains this is not related to the melacha of boirer and tzmut. So according to Rebbe Lezer, on Yom Tov you can go ahead and position it. On Shabbos you can't position it, but you can pour through it. They take it a notch lower. Ein toilinas ha-meshameres. But on Yom Tov you can't hang up this meshameres. Ve'ein oislan tului b'Shabbos. And likewise on Shabbos you can't even pour the wine through it. Avol noislan tului b'Yom Tov. On Yom Tov you can go ahead and pour the wine through it. They maintain that it involves a malach of boirer. So on Shabbos you can't do it, but on Yom Tov you can do it because you're preparing for food. It's a malach for the sake of eichel nefesh. Says the Gemara, how could Rebbe Lezer tell us that one may go ahead and place the strainer in position, be toilet shameres, where he's making an oil, although it's an oil harai, it's merely a temporary tent? How can he do that on Yom Tov? Hashta, if now we know, that Rabbi Eliezer holds, Oisufei oil arai loy masfinan. You can't even be moisif, you can't even make a temporary addition, a temporary oil arai, 10th addition. Lemeva dechatchila shari? Can you say that he allows it to be initiated, to begin, to erect a temporary oil on Yom Tov? Lemeva dechatchila shari, is that allowed? So what do we find that Rabbi Eliezer doesn't even allow adding a temporary oil? Mahi, what does it say you're referring to? This not as we learned in the Mishnah. Pekaka chaloin. This is the window shutter we learned earlier. So they used to remove it from the window. We're speaking about a skylight up in the roof. They removed it and they put it back in place. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, you can only put it back bizman shekosha b'tali, when the shutter is tied to the structure and it's actually hanging suspended, in which case it's pretty obvious that it was removed temporarily, it's being put back. You're not adding, you're not building, you're not creating anything, it just belongs right there. Piking boy, you can go ahead and shutter with it. But otherwise, any piking boy, you can't do that because it looks like you're going in, you're adding, you're building this temporary addition to the oil. So we see Rabbi Eliezer doesn't allow making this oil arai. Piking boy, either way you can use it. So we discussed this earlier. This was back on Daf Kuf Chaf Hey, exactly the point of the machlekes here. But in any case, we see Rabbi Eliezer is concerned about even oil arai. So even adding this temporary oil is a problem. How can you suggest that he allows initiating an oil arai? He explained, all agree, one cannot go ahead and initiate, erect a temporary oil, a temporary roof, a tent on Yom Tov. And certainly not on Shabbos. When then do they disagree? When he's merely coming to add this temporary oil, one may not do so on Yom Tov, and certainly not on Shabbos. One can be moisif, a temporary oil on Shabbos, and certainly on Yom Tov. So again, how could Rabbi Eliezer allow this in our Mishnah? If he doesn't even allow adding a temporary component of an oil arai, certainly not to erect it and initiate it. Says the Gemara, you're right. There's a problem, but on Yom Tov it's allowed because one can perform malachos for the sake of food preparation. Rabbi Eliezer saw like Rabbi Yehuda. He was like Rabbi Yehuda the Sadya. Ein ben Yom Tov l'Shabbos. There's no difference regarding malachos between Yom Tov and Shabbos. Ella oichal nefesh b'lvad, only concerning the allowance to do malachos for the sake of food preparation, which is allowed on Yom Tov, not on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda mater af machshir yochel nefesh. He says not only the actual food preparations, for instance, cooking, even machshir yochel nefesh, even malachos required for the preliminaries, for the preparation of the yochel nefesh, is allowed. For instance, if his kitchen utensil breaks up on Yom Tov, you can go and repair it. So even the machshirim are allowed. And Rabbi Eliezer concurs with this shita, therefore he allows placing the meshameres, despite the fact that he's doing a malacha, but since it's for the sake of preparing food, it's allowed. Says the Gemara, Eimer the Shamini Rabbi Yehuda. When did we hear Rabbi Yehuda's allowance? That's only b'machshirin. Those preliminaries, those preparations, she'ef shalai soisim erev Yom Tov, which he has no choice, he has no option. I can't do that erev Yom Tov. For instance, his utensil, which broke on Yom Tov. So Rabbi Yehuda says he can go repair it. But b'machshirim she'ef shalai soisim erev Yom Tov, however, machshirim which can easily be done before Yom Tov, so he has that prerogative. Mi shamasle. Do we then hear that Rabbi Yehuda allows it? So how can we say that Rabbi Eliezer allows making this oil, which is a machshir v'aychal nefesh, he's doing a malacha, so that he can pour the wine through it? That's something which he can easily have done before Yom Tov. Why does he allow it? Says the Gemara, you're right. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold that this will be allowed. But the Rabbi Eliezer, adi from Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Eliezer is actually stronger than Rabbi Yehuda. He allows even more. Not only does he allow the malachos for the actual food preparation, not only does he allow the malachos for the machshirim, to prepare the preliminaries, he allows even machshirim, which could have been done before Yom Tov. And therefore he allows spreading this strainer on the kli, because it's for the purpose of food preparation. So in summary, regarding this shameres, the strainer, we have Rabbi Eliezer who says that on Yom Tov you can go ahead and position it. On Shabbos you can pour through it. It doesn't have lav boyer. According to Rabbanan, on Yom Tov you can't go ahead and put it in position, but you can pour the wine through it because that's considered to be food preparation. On Shabbos you can't even pour wine through it because they regard it as a malacha of boyer. Okay, time for a brief review of today's daf. We began with a Mila Shaloi Bizmana, which was performed on Shabbos. So the Gemara concluded that if it's a case where he's not involved, he's not Torah the mitzvah, he enters Shabbos with no reason to be Mechal Shabbos, there is no child who is slated to have his bris today, and somehow he mistakenly goes and performs a bris, all shittas agree that he's Chayav Achatas. We have another two cases. We have a case where he's Torah the mitzvah. He's preoccupied, he's preparing himself for a proper mitzvah on Shabbos for a Mila Bizmana, but in actuality, in practice, he didn't do a mitzvah. For instance, he did the Mila on the Sunday baby, he did it on Shabbos. Or we have a case where we have two factors in favor. He was Torah the mitzvah. He had an infant who was awaiting a bris on Shabbos, so he's preparing himself for that mitzvah. And he actually did a mitzvah. For instance, he did a mitzvah, the Mila, on the Friday baby. So he did it a day late, but he did a mitzvah. So in these two cases, we have a discussion. We have two approaches now, Gemara. We have Rav Huna, who's more Machmer, of Yudah, who's more Mekel. Rav Huna says as follows. When there's one factor in favor, when he's Torah with our mitzvah, but he didn't actually do a mitzvah, all agree that he's Chai because the act was not an act of mitzvah. In the case where not only was he Torah with mitzvah, he was preoccupied with the mitzvah, but he actually did a mitzvah, then we have a machlekes. Rabbi Lezer says, nevertheless he's chayiv, because we look at the actual action. Did he do a mitzvah today? No. We disregard his intention. As Rabbi Yeshua says, the fact is, the person, was pursuing a mitzvah, therefore there's no chayiv chatas. Rabbi Yehuda says, when there's one factor in favor, that is sufficient according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yeshua. So Rabbi Yeshua says, as long as he's Torah the mitzvah, even though he didn't actually do a mitzvah, he's pater. Rabbi Lezer says, he's chayiv, because one factor is not sufficient. But in a case where there are two elements in favor, he was Torah the mitzvah, and he actually did a mitzvah. For instance, he did the Mila on the Friday baby, he did it on Shabbos, so he actually did a mitzvah. So since we have two factors in favor, all agree, in this case that he's pater. We know the Mishnah, which gave us a wide range of possible days for the bris milah from 8 till 12. We learned that if a child was ill, you need to wait 7 days from the point where his illness left him. We need to give him time to fully recover. Do we need 7 full periods of 24 hours? We left that inconclusive. We learned that one must uncover the atara if there's some flesh there, which is some bus of the arla remaining, which covers, concealing roiv of the goiva, of the height of the atara. He needs to go ahead and remove that. We learned that a cotton which is miserable basar, is plump and he's chubby and his flesh is sagging down, covering over the area of the milah midrabbanan. He must fix it up so that he doesn't appear like he doesn't have a bris milah. We discussed the case where during Kishu, during the hardening of the Aver, it is somewhat visible. There's a discussion whether or not we need to be concerned about that. We learned about the brachas of milah. So a milah of a Yisrael or a ger or eved, the moil will make a bracha asher kichonim tzvana ala milah. By Yisrael, we have the father who says the additional bracha of the achnisa yibrevis shalom avinu, and then there's an additional avarach. So by Yisrael, he says asher kiddush did me better, etc. By the gerim, he says lo malasad gerim, and the hatav memnam bris concludes with the words kuris abris, and by the avodim, similar bracha lo malasad avodim, and lahatav mem bris, and concludes with kuris abris. We concluded with a machlekes between Rabbi Lezer and Rabbanan regarding a strainer. According to Rabbi Lezer, he can go ahead and be toilet. He can hang that strainer on top of the kli, despite the fact that he's making a oil arai. Because according to Rabbi Lezer, even the machshirim, the preliminaries required for preparation of food, is mutter on Yom Tov, even those that cannot be done before Yom Tov. On Shabbos, you can't hang it up, but you can pour the wine through it. He doesn't regard it as burr, since it's just happening automatically. He's pouring it through without manipulating the strainer. Whereas according to Rabbanan, they hold one cannot do a malacha even on Yom Tov for the machshirim or the echel nefesh. Therefore, you can't go and tie hang the strainer there. You can pour through it because he's actually filtering his wine, which is a malacha for echel nefesh. But on Shabbos, you can't even pour the wine through it. But that's regarded as a malacha of burr. He's separating good from bad. Therefore, you can't do it on Shabbos.